Are you going on a cruise soon and think you've got the rules covered? In 2026, that is exactly how a lot of people are getting caught out, because cruise lines have quietly changed check-in rules, tightened security, updated onboard policies, and added new money traps that are catching even seasoned cruisers off guard. So in this video, we're going through 30 new cruise rules that can seriously affect your trip, your budget, and even whether you get on board at all. Click the like button if you love cruising, and let's get into it. Number 1. Your arrival appointment is no longer just a suggestion. A lot of cruisers still treat their arrival appointment like a rough guide. They think if their check-in says 11:30, turning up at 10:15 should be fine because earlier must be better, right? And I have to admit, I was one of those people. It felt like a neat little trick, and honestly, 90% of the time I got on earlier and it was awesome. But in 2026, that is not something I would count on anymore. A lot more cruise terminals are treating those arrival windows much more seriously now, because they are trying to control crowds, security lines, luggage flow, and thousands of people all turning up at once. That means if you arrive way too early, you may not be waved straight through like people used to be. Instead, you could end up standing outside, stuck in a long queue, or being told to wait until your proper slot. And if you arrive late, that can be even worse, because once the terminal gets busy, your nice relaxed start can quickly turn into stress, confusion, and a lot of unnecessary rushing. So the smart move now is to treat your arrival appointment like a real appointment. Not a suggestion, not a maybe. Aim to get there a little before your window, not wildly early, and definitely not pushing it late. Because one of the new cruise rules catching people off guard is this: the boarding process is a lot less casual than it used to feel. Number 2. Miss the final check-in cutoff and the ship can leave without you. This one is more so for newer cruisers, so if you are a proper pro cruiser, you might want to skip to the next one. But a lot of people still do not realize this. They hear the cruise leaves at, say, 4 p.m., and they assume that means they can more or less roll in right up until then. But that is not how it works. Cruise lines have a final check-in cutoff, and once that cutoff passes, they can shut it down completely even though the ship itself is still sitting there. And that is what catches people off guard. You can be at the port, you can literally see the ship, and you can still miss your cruise because you missed the terminal deadline, not the sail-away time. That feels ridiculous when it happens, but it happens. It is easy to see how people get this wrong too. Maybe traffic was bad. Maybe the hotel took longer than expected. Maybe you thought arriving a bit later would help you avoid the crowds. But cruise lines are not running boarding the old relaxed way anymore. They have manifests to finalize, security to clear, and rules they have to follow before that ship can sail. So, when your cruise line gives you a latest check-in time, treat that like the real deadline. Not departure time. Not all aboard time in your head. The actual latest time they tell you. Because one of the worst feelings in cruising would have to be standing at the terminal, looking at your ship, and realizing your holiday is over before it even started. Number 3. Ship time matters more than your phone's local time in port. This one is more so for newer cruisers, so if you are a proper pro cruiser, you might want to skip to the next one. But for a lot of people, this still catches them out because phones make people feel way too confident. You get off the ship, your phone updates automatically, and suddenly it is showing local port time. Looks harmless, feels helpful. But if the ship is running on a different time, that is where people get into real trouble. And the dangerous part is how normal it feels. You're walking around the port, maybe grabbing lunch, maybe doing a bit of shopping, maybe thinking you have got plenty of time left. Your phone says one thing, so you trust it. Meanwhile, the ship is using its own time, and those two times are not always the same. That is how people end up cutting it way too fine or missing all aboard completely. The smart move is to stop trusting your phone as the boss in port. The second you get on the ship, know what ship time is and stick to that, especially on port days. A cheap watch set to ship time can honestly save you a lot of stress because your phone can switch without you really noticing. Because in 2026, one of the easiest ways to ruin your day is still one of the dumbest, believing your phone knows better than the ship. Number 4. Leaving airplane mode off too early can connect you to cellular at sea. This one has caught out plenty of cruisers, including people who thought they were being careful. You get off the ship, you see land, you see shops, you see the port right there, and you think, okay, I'm basically back on normal signal now. So you turn airplane mode off a bit too early and just assume your phone will connect to a normal local network. But that is where the trouble starts. Just because you are near land does not mean your phone has stopped talking to the ship. In some ports, your phone can still connect to cellular at sea or another ship-based signal even while you are standing right there on the pier. And that is where people get smashed with crazy charges without even realizing it. The really sneaky part is that it does not feel like you are doing anything dramatic. Maybe your emails refresh, maybe a few apps wake up, maybe photos start syncing in the background, and suddenly you are burning through money just because your phone grabbed the wrong signal for a few minutes. So the safe move is simple. Keep airplane mode on until you are properly off the ship, out past the port area, and you can clearly see the local carrier name on your screen. Not just bars, the actual local network. Because one little tap at the wrong time can turn into one of the dumbest charges on your whole cruise. Number 5. Forgotten CBD, ammo, or banned items can now turn into a terminal disaster. This one is catching people off guard because a lot of the time, it is not even something they packed on purpose. It is the forgotten CBD gummy at the bottom of a bag, the old vape cartridge in a side pocket, the pocket knife you meant to take out, or even something like a stray bullet casing that got left in a backpack months ago and was never noticed. Years ago, some people probably got away with more of this stuff just being confiscated, and that was the end of it. But now, depending on the port, the cruise line, and what they find, it can turn into a much bigger mess very quickly. We are talking denied boarding, security interviews, local authorities getting involved, and in some cases your cruise being over before it even starts. And that is why this catches people out so badly. A lot of passengers are not trying to break rules. They just assume, oh, that old thing is probably still in there somewhere, it won't matter. But the scanner does not care whether you forgot about it or not. So before you pack for a cruise, check every bag properly. Not just the main section. Check the side pockets, the hidden zips, the makeup pouch, the backpack you used 6 months ago, the suitcase liner, everything. Because one forgotten item can now cause way more drama than people expect. Number 6. More terminals and cruise lines are screening harder for drugs and prohibited items. This is kind of the follow-on from the last one, but it deserves its own spot because it is not just about what you forgot in your bag. It is also about how much harder the screening itself has become. A lot of cruisers still picture cruise terminal security as a bit more relaxed than airports, but that mindset is getting outdated fast. In 2026, more terminals and cruise lines seem to be taking a much tougher approach, with stricter bag screening, more attention on prohibited items, and a lot less patience for people acting like the rules are optional. So if someone turns up thinking they can sneak something through, or that security will just give them a warning and move on, they are taking a bigger risk than they probably realize. And even for people who are not trying to sneak anything, this still matters. Because it means you need to be a lot more careful about what is in your bags, what is allowed on that particular cruise line, and what local laws apply at that port. One cruise line might be stricter on one item, another might focus more heavily on something else, and passengers are getting caught out because they assume all cruise rules are basically the same. So the smart move now is to stop treating cruise terminal security like a casual formality. Check your cruise line's prohibited items list before you leave home, check the port rules if needed, and assume screening is going to be more thorough than it used to be. Because one of the biggest mistakes cruisers are making right now is acting like the rules have stayed the same when clearly they have not. Number 7. Wine is still allowed on some lines, but only under strict embarkation rules. This is one of those rules that sounds simple until people actually try to do it. They hear that yes, some cruise lines still let you bring wine on board, and then they assume that means they can just throw a couple of bottles in a suitcase and they are good to go. Not quite. Because the rule is usually a lot more specific than people realize. On some lines, it has to be wine, not spirits. It often has to be unopened. It usually has to be carried on, not packed in your checked luggage. And there is normally a limit, so once you go over that, you are not being clever. You are just giving security something to deal with. This is where people get caught off guard. They know the general idea of the rule, but not the actual conditions attached to it. So, they pack it the wrong way, bring too much, or assume their cruise line allows the same thing another one does. Then suddenly the bottles are being confiscated, or they are standing there arguing over a rule they never properly checked. So the smart move is to look up your exact cruise line's wine policy before embarkation day and follow it exactly. Not roughly. Exactly. Because this is one of those areas where cruise lines might still allow something, but only if you do it their way. And that is the part people keep missing. It is not just about whether wine is allowed, it is about how it is allowed. Number 8. Bring the wrong drinks on board and they can be confiscated immediately. This is where people get tripped up because they hear one rule about wine and then assume the rest of the drink rules must be pretty relaxed too. They are not. A lot of cruise lines are very specific now about what drinks you can bring, how much you can bring, and what happens if you get it wrong. So someone turns up with a case of soft drink, a few bottles of water, maybe some energy drinks, maybe a bottle of spirits, and they think, well, it is only for my room, what is the big deal? The big deal is that cruise lines do not care what your personal reason is if the item breaks their policy. If it is not allowed, it can be taken straight away. And this is why people keep getting caught out. They do not check their exact cruise line's beverage rules. They just go by what they heard online, what they brought on a different line, or what someone said worked last year. But those rules can differ more than people expect, and some lines are getting stricter about enforcing them properly at embarkation. So before you pack any drinks at all, check exactly what your cruise line allows and how it has to be brought on board. Because people are still losing perfectly good drinks at the terminal simply because they assumed the rules were more relaxed than they really are. And that is a silly way to start a cruise, annoyed, out of pocket, and arguing over a bottle you were never going to win back anyway. Number 9. Non-refundable onboard credit does not always work the way people expect. This one catches people out because the words onboard credit sound a lot better than they really are. People hear they have got $100, $200, maybe more, and they start mentally spending it before they have even boarded. They think, great, that will cover gratuities, maybe part of the cruise fare extras, maybe a few other charges too. But then the surprise hits. A lot of onboard credit is much more limited than people expect. Some of it is non-refundable, which means if you do not use it, you do not get the leftover amount back. And some types of onboard credit cannot be used for everything, so people suddenly realize it will not cover the exact charges they thought it would. That is where the frustration starts. You budget in your head thinking that credit is going to soften the blow of your final bill, and then you find out certain charges still go straight onto your card anyway. So what felt like free money starts feeling a lot less generous once you realize there are strings attached. The smart move is to check exactly what kind of onboard credit you have and what it can actually be used for before you start counting on it. Because in 2026, one of the easiest ways to get your cruise budget wrong is assuming onboard credit works like cash when a lot of the time, it really does not. Number 10. Daily gratuities and service charges keep catching budget cruisers off guard. This one still surprises a lot of people, especially newer cruisers who look at the cruise fare and think that is basically the cost of the trip sorted. Then, once they get on board, or sometimes even before they sail, they realize there are daily gratuities and service charges being added on top, and suddenly the total looks quite a bit different. What catches people off guard is not just that the charges exist, it is how quickly they add up. When it is charged per person, per day, it can make a noticeable difference by the end of the cruise, especially for families or anyone trying to stick to a tighter budget. So, what looked like a decent deal at booking can start feeling a lot more expensive once those extras start stacking up. And then, there is the confusion around what is already included and what is not. Some people think their prepaid extras covered it. Some think their onboard credit will handle it. Some do not even look closely until the end of the cruise, and that is when the shock kicks in. So the smart move is to check the gratuity policy before you sail and factor it into the real cost of the trip from the start. Because one of the easiest ways to blow your cruise budget is not with the big flashy purchases. It is with the charges people forget to properly account for. Number 11. Non-refundable deposits are trapping people who think they can change plans later. This is one of those cruise rules that does not feel like a big deal when you're booking, but it can feel very real later on. A lot of people see a decent fare, click through the booking, and assume if something changes, they can just move it, cancel it, or sort it out down the track. But more and more, that is not how it works. A lot of cruise fares now come with non-refundable deposits, and that is where people get caught. At the time of booking, it can sound fine because the trip feels far away and everything seems locked in. Then life happens. Plans change, flights get too expensive, somebody cannot go anymore, or you simply change your mind. And suddenly that deposit is not this small flexible placeholder you thought it was. It is money you may not get back. That is why this keeps catching cruisers off guard. They book fast because the fare looks good, but they do not stop and think about what they are giving up in exchange for that lower price. In a lot of cases, the cheaper fare is cheaper for a reason. It gives you less flexibility if anything changes later. So the smart move is to always check whether the deposit is refundable before you book and decide if that lower upfront price is actually worth the risk. Because in 2026, one of the easiest ways to lose money before your cruise even starts is assuming you can just sort it out later. Number 12. Online check-in deadlines are stricter than many people realize. A lot of people think online check-in is just one of those helpful little things you can do if you get around to it. Nice to have, but not a big deal. But on a lot of cruises now, leaving it too late can create way more hassle than people expect, because the check-in process is getting tighter, more digital, and a lot less forgiving. This is where people get caught. They put it off, thinking they will do it the night before, or maybe on the way to the port, and then suddenly they're dealing with missing documents, limited arrival times, extra delays, or a boarding process that feels much messier than it needed to be. What should have been a simple part of the prep turns into unnecessary stress right before the holiday starts. And the annoying part is that it often feels so avoidable afterwards. Because it is not usually some huge dramatic mistake. It is just people assuming the old relaxed way still applies, where you could leave things a bit later and still muddle through fine. So, the smart move is to do your online check-in as early as your cruise line allows and treat it like an actual deadline, not a little optional task to deal with later. Because in 2026, the people who leave cruise admin until the last minute are the ones making embarkation day harder than it needs to be. Number 13. Some newer ships now rely heavily on the app, even if you do not buy Wi-Fi. This is one of those changes that catches people out because they assume no Wi-Fi means no app, and that is not always how it works anymore. On a lot of newer ships, the cruise line app has become a big part of how the ship runs. It is not just some optional extra for techie people. It can be where you check the daily schedule, look up dining, message people in your group, book activities, and keep track of what is happening on board. What throws people off is that they board thinking they can just wing it the old-fashioned way, only to realize the app is doing a lot more work than they expected. And even if the app itself is available without buying a full internet package, that still does not mean every passenger is ready for how dependent some ships have become on it. So if you are sailing on a newer ship, do not assume the app is something you can just ignore. Download it before you leave home, log in early, and have a look around while you're still on normal internet and not trying to figure it out in the middle of embarkation day chaos. Because one of the quiet new cruise rules is this: you do not always need paid Wi-Fi to use the app, but you probably do need the app to make the cruise feel a lot easier. Number 14. Free app access does not mean free internet access. This is where a lot of cruisers get confused, especially now that cruise lines keep pushing their apps more and more. People hear that the app works on board without buying Wi-Fi, and they assume that means their phone can pretty much do whatever it normally does. That is where people get caught out. Because on many ships, the app itself may work for things like the daily planner, bookings, deck maps, or checking your onboard account, but that does not mean your internet is free. Your messages, emails, social media, web browsing, and everything else outside that app can still be locked behind a paid internet package or start using the wrong connection if you are not careful. And that is why this rule keeps confusing people. They think they are safely using the ship's app, but then they forget what is actually included and what is not. The app might be free to access. The internet around it usually is not. So the smart move is to understand that those are two separate things. Free app access is helpful, but it is not the same as having free internet on board. And if you do not understand that difference before you sail, it is very easy to assume you are connected in a way you really are not. Number 15. Newer ships with destination elevators confuse first-timers badly. This is one of those little changes that sounds minor until you are standing there looking slightly lost in front of a lift bank while everyone else seems to know exactly what they are doing. On some newer ships, you do not walk into the elevator and press your floor like normal. Instead, you choose your deck on a screen outside first, and then the system tells you which elevator to get into. If you have never seen it before, it can feel weirdly confusing for something so simple. People get in, realize there are no buttons, step back out, get into the wrong one, or stand there wondering if the elevator is broken, and yes, it does make you feel like the rookie in the room very quickly. It is not the end of the world, obviously, But it is one of those newer ship changes that catches people off guard because they are expecting normal elevators and suddenly the ship is acting like an airport or a modern office building. And when you are already trying to learn the layout of a big ship, that is just one more thing that can make the first day feel a bit more chaotic than it needs to. So, if you are sailing on a newer ship, it is worth checking whether it uses destination elevators before you go. Because this is one of those things that takes 2 minutes to understand at home and somehow feels 10 times more confusing when you are standing there with your cruise card in one hand and people waiting behind you. Number 16. The old save a deck chair and disappear trick is getting cracked down on. This is one of those cruise habits people got away with for years, so a lot of passengers still act like it is perfectly normal. They throw a towel on a good chair, maybe leave a book or a cheap pair of thongs there, then wander off for breakfast or disappear for an hour and expect that spot to still be theirs when they come back. But cruise lines have been getting less patient with this, and honestly, so have other passengers. On busy sea days, chair hogging annoys everybody, so more ships are cracking down with time limits, warning tags, and crew removing unattended belongings if the chair sits empty too long. That is what catches people off guard. They assume the old little trick still works because maybe it did on past cruises. Then they come back and their stuff has been moved, the chair is gone, and now they are annoyed over a rule that is getting enforced a lot harder than it used to be. So the smart move now is simple. If you want the chair, actually use the chair. Do not try to reserve it like it is a private apartment by the pool. Because one of the quiet new cruise rules is this. If you vanish for too long, your deck chair may vanish too. Number 17. Smart glasses and recording tech can cause problems in sensitive areas. This is one of those newer cruise issues that a lot of people do not think about until they are suddenly getting stopped over something they forgot they were even wearing. Smart glasses, camera glasses, and other recording tech can seem harmless when you're just walking around the ship, but the second you go near a kids club, spa, restroom area, or somewhere else, people expect a lot more privacy. That can become a problem fast. And the awkward part is that you might not even be trying to record anything. You might just have them on because they are your normal glasses, or because you forgot they have a camera built in. But from the ship's point of view, they do not know what you are doing with them, and in more sensitive areas, they are not going to want to take chances. That is why this is catching people off guard. Cruise ships are dealing with newer tech now, and some of that tech creates privacy concerns that simply were not part of cruising a few years ago. So people are walking into spaces with devices that attract way more attention than they expect. So the smart move is to think ahead. If you are heading somewhere private, family-focused, or sensitive, leave the smart glasses and anything obviously recordable back in the cabin. Because in 2026, one of the easiest ways to create an unnecessary confrontation is wearing tech that makes the wrong people uncomfortable. Number 18. Casual dress keeps getting tighter in some paid dining venues. This one catches people out because cruise lines still love to market that relaxed, casual holiday feeling, and, on a lot of the ship that is true. But then people turn up to a paid dining venue thinking the same rules apply everywhere, and suddenly they are being told no shorts, no flip-flops, no tank tops, or no entry dressed like that. And that is where the frustration kicks in. Because from the passenger's point of view, they are on holiday, they are on a cruise, and they may have spent the whole day in warm weather dressed casually like everyone else. So being turned away from a restaurant they already booked or already paid extra for feels ridiculous. But cruise lines are tightening this more in certain venues, especially where they want the experience to feel a bit more polished. What catches people off guard is that the dress code is often not extreme, but it is specific enough to matter. You do not usually need to pack like you're going to a wedding. But if you do not bring at least one outfit that is slightly more put together, you can end up limited in places you thought you would be fine. So the smart move is simple. Even if the cruise feels casual overall, pack 1 or 2 safe evening options that will work in those paid venues without any drama. Because one of the silly ways to ruin your own dinner plans is finding out the dress code only when you are already standing at the door. Number 19. Specialty dining upsells are getting more aggressive on board. This is one of those things that can make a cruise start feeling a bit more salesy than people expected. You board the ship thinking you will just decide as you go, and then almost straight away you are seeing restaurant packages, limited time offers, staff asking if you want to upgrade, and little reminders that the best dining experiences are apparently somewhere else and cost extra. Now, sometimes those restaurants are worth it. That is not really the issue. The issue is how much harder the upsell can feel now. especially on newer ships or busier sailings where cruise lines are clearly pushing those extra spend areas more than they used to. And that is what catches people off guard. They think they are just having a look around, and suddenly they are being encouraged to book now. Because spots are filling fast, this offer is only for today, or this package gives you such a great deal. Before they know it, they have spent way more on dining than they planned to. So the smart move is to decide your dining budget before you get on board and stick to it. If you want one specialty meal, great. If you want none, that is fine too. But do not let the onboard sales energy make the decision for you. Because one of the quiet changes in cruising is this. The food may still be included, but the pressure to upgrade definitely is not. Number 20. Cruise ship medical centers are expensive enough to wreck your onboard budget. A lot of people still think of the ship's medical center like a normal little clinic that is there if you need something minor. A stomach issue, a bad headache, maybe a bit of seasickness, maybe you just want to get checked quickly and move on. But what catches people off guard is how expensive that visit can get once you're actually charged for it. And it is not just the consultation itself. It is how quickly the extras stack up. A simple visit can turn into tests, medication, treatment, maybe an IV. And before you know it, a problem you thought would be a minor inconvenience has become a very expensive line on your onboard account. That can be a real shock, especially if you were already watching your budget. Now, obviously, if it is a real emergency, you go. No question. But this is exactly why so many experienced cruisers say to bring a proper little travel med kit with the basics, because not every issue needs to become a ship medical bill if it is something simple you could have handled yourself. So the smart move is to treat the medical center like something important, not casual. Use it when you genuinely need it, but do not assume it is going to feel cheap or low stakes just because you're on holiday. Because one unexpected stop there can cost a lot more than people think. Number 21. Packing your meds in checked luggage is still one of the costliest mistakes. This is one of those mistakes that sounds obvious when you hear it, but people still do it all the time because they are trying to save space in their carry-on, or they think, well, my suitcase will get to the cabin later anyway. The problem is, later can be a lot later than people expect. On embarkation day, your checked bags do not magically appear the second you board. Sometimes they take hours to show up, and if there is any delay or mix-up, that's a long time to be without something you actually need. So if your medication is in there, now you are stuck waiting, hoping the bag turns up, and starting your cruise stressed for all the wrong reasons. And the really bad version of this is when the bag is delayed, misplaced, or sent somewhere it should not have gone. Then, it stops being an annoying inconvenience and starts becoming a serious problem. That is why this is still one of the costliest mistakes people make, because it can affect your health, your comfort, and sometimes lead to expensive onboard medical help you never should have needed in the first place. So the smart move is simple. Keep your medications in your carry-on, not your checked luggage. No exceptions. Because this is one of those cruise rules that should be common sense by now, and yet it still catches people out. Number 22. Putting cruise luggage tags on before your flight can backfire. This is one of those little mistakes that feels organized at the time. People print their cruise luggage tags at home, attach them nice and early, and think, great, one less thing to worry about later. It feels efficient. It feels like you are ahead of the game. But the problem is, those tags are not really made for airport baggage systems. Between conveyor belts, rough handling, and bags getting dragged all over the place, those cruise tags can get ripped off, bent, or damaged before you even make it to the port. And if that happens, you have turned your clever little head start into one more thing to deal with right before boarding. That is why this catches people off guard. They think they are being prepared, but they are actually attaching something delicate way too early. Cruise luggage tags are for the cruise terminal part of the journey, not the airport part. So the smart move is to keep your cruise tags in your carry-on and only attach them once you are at the port, or, at the very earliest, the night before at your hotel if you are already done flying. Because one of the easiest ways to create an unnecessary luggage headache is trying to be a bit too prepared too soon. Number 23. Waiting until the last day to check your onboard spending is a bad move. A lot of people do this without even thinking about it. They enjoy the cruise, tap the card, sign for a few things here and there. Maybe buy a drink package upgrade, maybe do a specialty dinner, maybe grab something from a shop, and they tell themselves they will look at the total near the end. Sounds harmless. But that is exactly how little mistakes turn into annoying surprises. Because if something has been charged wrong, duplicated, or added when it should not have been, the last morning is the worst possible time to discover it. That is when guest services turns into a huge line of stressed people all trying to fix problems at once while also worrying about getting off the ship, finding luggage, and making flights home. And that is why this catches people off guard. It is not always some massive disaster. Sometimes, it is just a small wrong charge here, a canceled thing that still showed up there, or something that does not look right. But even small mistakes are much easier to sort out on day 3 than in a packed line on the final morning. So, the smart move is to check your onboard spending regularly during the cruise, even if it is just quickly on the app or on the cabin TV. That way, if something looks off, you can deal with it while there is still time and a much better chance of fixing it without all the chaos. Because the last day of a cruise is busy enough already. That is not when you want to start auditing your bill. Number 24. Port day roaming charges are still catching people who think they are on land already. This one sounds ridiculous until it happens to someone, and then suddenly it is very expensive. People get off the ship, see the port, see the shops, maybe even see a local phone carrier name pop up later, and they think, well, I'm on land now, so I'm fine. But that is not always true the second you step off. Because in some ports, especially while you are still near the ship or around the terminal area, your phone can still grab the wrong connection before you even realize it. So people start checking messages, uploading photos, opening maps, or letting apps do their thing in the background, all while assuming they are safely back on normal service. That is where the damage happens. It feels like a normal little phone moment, but if the connection is wrong, those few minutes can be a very expensive mistake. And that is why this still catches people off guard, because the brain sees land and assumes the cruise phone risk is over. So the smart move is to stay cautious even once you are off the ship. Keep airplane mode on until you are clearly away from the port area and properly connected to the local carrier or safe Wi-Fi you actually trust. Because one of the easiest ways to waste money on a cruise is thinking the danger ended the second your feet hit the pier. Number 25. Shore excursion times follow ship time, not whatever your phone switches to. This is where people get caught twice, because it is not just wandering around port on your own that can trip you up. It can happen with shore excursions too. A lot of people assume that if they booked through the cruise line, the timing will somehow magically sort itself out in their phone, or that local time must be the one that matters once they are on land. Not necessarily. The important thing to remember is that shore excursion timing usually follows ship time, not whatever your phone decides to do when it connects to the local network. So if your phone jumps an hour and you do not notice, you can end up thinking you have more time than you actually do, or you can start panicking when you are actually fine. Either way, it creates confusion you do not need, and this is why it still catches people off guard. They are doing what feels sensible. They are checking the time on the device they use for everything else in life. But on a cruise, your phone is not always the boss. The ship is. So the smart move is to treat ship time as the only time that matters on excursion days, whether you booked through the cruise line or not. If you're doing anything in port that depends on getting back by a certain time, use ship time and ignore anything else. Because one of the easiest ways to turn a nice port day into sheer panic is trusting a phone that quietly switched teams on you. Number 26. Carry-on essentials matter more now because cabins and bags are slower to settle on day 1. A lot of people still board thinking they will drop their stuff in the cabin, get organized properly, and then start enjoying the ship. But on a lot of cruises now, day 1 can feel slower and messier than people expect. Cabins may not be ready straight away, luggage can take a while to show up, and the first few hours can feel like a bit of a waiting game. That is where people get caught out. They packed smart overall, but not smart for those first few hours. So now their swimsuit is somewhere in a suitcase they cannot get to yet, their chargers are buried, their medication is missing with the big bags, or they're wandering around in travel clothes wishing they had packed one small day 1 survival kit properly. And it matters more now because embarkation day is already busy enough. The people who have got their key things with them can just relax, eat, explore, or change when the cabin opens. The people who did not think ahead are stuck feeling half-settled and mildly irritated, while everyone else already looks like they are in cruise mode. So the smart move is to pack your carry-on like it needs to get you through the first chunk of the cruise on its own. Medication, documents, chargers, a swimsuit, anything you might want before your main luggage arrives. Because one of the easiest ways to make day one feel more annoying than exciting is packing like your suitcase will magically appear the second you board. Number 27. Onboard booking desks are pushing harder because the best bonuses stay on board only. This is one of those things that catches people off guard because they assume they can just think about their next cruise later. Maybe once they get home, once they have looked at flights, checked dates, or had a proper think about it. And of course you can do that. But what a lot of people do not realize is that the onboard booking desk is often where the strongest bonuses show up. That is why cruise lines push it so hard while you are still sailing. They know you are already in cruise mode, already imagining the next trip, and much more likely to say yes when the holiday feeling is still fresh. So they dangle lower deposits, bonus onboard credit, or extra little perks that may not look quite as good once you're back on land. What catches people out is not just that the desk exists. It is how often the best deal is tied to booking while you are still on board, even if you do not lock in all the details right then. So people go home thinking they will sort it out later, then realize the extra value they could have had disappeared with the cruise. So the smart move is at least to check what the onboard offer actually is before you get off the ship. You do not have to jump blindly into another booking, but you should know what you are walking away from. Because one of the quieter new cruise rules is this. Some of the best bonuses are designed to stay on board, not follow you home. Number 28. Cruise line safety records, sanitation scores, and outbreaks are easier to check before booking. This is one of those things more people should be doing now, especially because the information is a lot easier to find than it used to be. A lot of cruisers still book based on price, itinerary, or a pretty ship tour online, but they never stop to check the stuff that actually tells you how that ship has been performing behind the scenes. And that matters more than people think, because sanitation scores, health incidents, and even safety-related reports can give you a much clearer picture of what is going on than a glossy brochure ever will. Now, that does not mean one issue automatically makes a ship terrible, but it does mean passengers have fewer excuses for going in blind. That is what makes this feel like a new rule in practice. Not that cruise lines suddenly want you checking this stuff, because of course they do not, but the information is much easier to access now, and smarter cruisers are using it before they book instead of after something goes wrong. So, the smart move is to spend a few minutes checking the ship's sanitation history, recent health news, and anything else that gives you a more realistic picture before you hand over your money. Because in 2026, one of the most avoidable cruise mistakes is doing all your research on the fun stuff and none of it on the important stuff. Number 29. Self-assist debarkation is becoming the smarter move for a lot more cruisers. A lot of people still do debarkation the old way. They put their bags out the night before, wait for their group to be called, sit around in a lounge half awake, and just accept that getting off the ship is going to be slow and annoying. And sometimes that still works fine. But for more and more cruisers, self-assist is becoming the smarter option. Why? Because if you can comfortably carry or roll your own luggage off the ship, you can usually get moving much faster and with a lot more control. You're not stuck waiting for your number, not hoping your bags show up where they should, and not sitting there watching the clock if you have a flight, a train, or a long drive ahead. That is what catches people off guard. They do not realize they actually have a choice, or they assume self-assist sounds harder than it really is. But if you travel fairly light and can manage your own bags, it can make the whole end of the cruise feel much smoother. So the smart move is to at least consider self-assist before your last night, especially if getting off earlier would make your travel day easier. Because one of the quiet changes in cruising is this. For a lot of passengers, the fastest way off the ship is simply not to hand your bags over in the first place. Number 30. The biggest new rule of all. Cruise like it's 2019 and 2026 will punish you for it. This is really the rule sitting underneath everything else on this list. Because a lot of cruisers are not getting caught out by one huge dramatic change. They are getting caught out by lots of smaller changes, all piled on top of each other. And the common thread is that they are cruising like the old rules still apply. They still think arrival times are flexible. They still think their phone will sort itself out in port. They still think the app is optional, the security screening is casual, the drink rules are basically the same, and if anything goes wrong, they can just fix it later. That is the mindset that keeps getting people into trouble now, because cruising in 2026 is not exactly the same as it was a few years ago. It is more digital, more tightly managed, more aggressively monetized in certain areas, and in some ways a lot less forgiving. The people who have the smoothest cruises now are not always the people with the most experience. Sometimes they are just the ones who realize the rules changed and adjusted early. So the smartest thing you can do before your next cruise is stop assuming your old habits still work. Check the fine print, double-check the app, respect ship time, know the deadlines, know the policies, and go in with the mindset that cruising is still amazing, but it is definitely not running on autopilot anymore. Because that really is the biggest new cruise rule of all. Cruise like it's 2019, and 2026 will punish you for it.